Elvis Presley was in the middle of Love Me Tender when he suddenly stopped singing. The crowd of 2,500 people fell silent, confused. Elvis put down his microphone, walked to the edge of the stage, and stared into the audience. Then he said 7 words that shocked everyone in the Las Vegas International Hotel. "Mr. Dean Martin, would you please stand up?" What happened in the next 5 minutes became one of the most legendary moments in music history and proved that even the king knew who the real king of cool was. It was August 1969, and Elvis Presley was terrified. Not the kind of fear that comes from performing. He'd done that since he was a kid. This was different. This was the fear of being judged by the man who'd taught him everything he knew about being cool. The Las Vegas International Hotel was packed with 2,500 people for Elvis's comeback show. After years of making mediocre movies in Hollywood, Elvis was finally returning to live performance. The stakes couldn't be higher. Critics, fans, celebrities, everyone who mattered in entertainment was watching. But Elvis wasn't worried about the critics. He was worried about one man sitting in row 7, seat 12, Dean Martin. Backstage before the show, Elvis paced nervously. His wife Priscilla watched him with concern. "Baby, you okay?" she asked. "Dean Martin's out there," Elvis said, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "So, you've performed for presidents." "Presidents don't matter," Elvis replied. "Dean Martin does. That man taught me how to hold a microphone, how to move on stage, how to make a ballad sound like a conversation. Everything I know about being cool I learned from watching him." Priscilla smiled. "Then show him what a good student you were." But Elvis shook his head. "You don't understand. When I was 17 years old in Memphis, broke and nobody, I used to watch Dean Martin on TV every week. The way he'd lean against the piano, the way he'd smile at the camera like he was letting you in on a secret, the way he made every woman in America feel like he was singing just for her. I studied that man like he was a textbook." Elvis paused, his voice dropping. "And now he's sitting in my audience, the master watching the student. What if I disappoint him?" What Elvis didn't know was that Dean Martin was having similar thoughts on the other side of the curtain. Dean had arrived at the hotel an hour earlier, trying to be discreet. He'd worn sunglasses, hoping to blend into the crowd, but you can't hide Dean Martin in Las Vegas. This was his town. He'd been performing at the Sands Hotel for years and helped build Vegas into the entertainment capital of the world. Everyone knew him. When Dean took his seat, people around him whispered excitedly. Some asked for autographs. Dean signed them graciously, but wished they'd be quiet. He hadn't come here to be noticed. He'd come to watch Elvis. Dean's date that evening, a woman named Sandra, leaned over. "You seem nervous." "I am," admitted Dean. "Why? You're Dean Martin. You're the biggest star in Vegas." Dean shook his head. "Not anymore. That kid about to walk on stage, he's the future. I'm the past. And I just hope he doesn't think I came here to judge him." "Then why did you come?" Dean thought about that. "Because I want to see what he's done with it. Everything I taught him, even though I never met him, even though I taught him through a TV screen, I want to see if he made it his own. That's how legends are born, not by copying, but by taking what you learned and making it better." The lights dimmed, the crowd erupted, and Elvis Presley walked onto the stage of the Las Vegas International Hotel. For the first 45 minutes, Elvis was electric. He performed Blue Suede Shoes, All Shook Up, Jailhouse Rock, all the hits that had made him famous. The crowd was on their feet, screaming, just like the old days. Elvis was in his element, moving with that signature hip shake, grinning that famous grin, sweat pouring down his face. But every few songs, Elvis's eyes would drift to row 7, seat 12, to Dean Martin. And every time, Dean would be watching with that inscrutable expression, the same cool, unreadable face that had captivated audiences for 20 years. Elvis couldn't tell if Dean was impressed or bored, and it was driving him crazy. Then came Love Me Tender. This was Elvis's signature ballad, the song that showed his vulnerable side, his romantic side.
The arrangement began, soft, gentle, intimate. The crowd fell silent, swaying. Elvis closed his eyes and began to sing. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." But as Elvis sang, something happened. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Dean Martin. And in that moment, Elvis was 17 again, sitting in his tiny apartment in Memphis, watching Dean Martin on his black and white TV, learning how to sing a ballad, learning how to make every word count, learning how to break hearts with nothing but your voice and sincerity. Elvis stopped singing. The band, confused, continued for a few bars before trailing off. The entire venue went silent. 2,500 people held their breath. Had Elvis forgotten the words? Was something wrong? Elvis put down his microphone. He walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on row 7. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice clear but emotional, "there's someone in the audience tonight, someone very special, someone who probably doesn't know this, but he's the reason I'm standing on this stage." The audience began to murmur. Who was Elvis talking about? People looked around, trying to figure it out. Elvis continued, his voice growing stronger. "When I was a kid in Memphis, before anyone knew my name, I used to watch this man on television. I studied every move he made, every note he sang, every look he gave the camera. He taught me that being a performer isn't about being loud or flashy. It's about being real. It's about making a connection." Elvis pointed directly at Dean Martin. "Mr. Dean Martin, would you please stand up?" The entire venue erupted. People turned in their seats, necks craning to see. And there, in row 7, Dean Martin slowly stood up. His face was a mixture of surprise and emotion. He hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted this, but there was no hiding now. Elvis was walking off the stage. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the king of rock and roll descended the steps and walked up the aisle toward the king of cool. Dean stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Elvis reached him and stopped just a few feet away. The entire hotel could have heard a pin drop.
Then, Elvis Presley did something that nobody expected, something that would be talked about for decades. He got down on one knee. The crowd gasped. Grown men and women began to cry. This wasn't just a gesture of respect. This was the king himself bowing to the man who taught him how to be royalty. "Mr. Martin," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I was 17 years old, I watched you perform Memories Are Made of This on television, and I said to myself, that's what a real performer looks like. You made it look so easy, so natural, like you were just hanging out with friends, and oh, by the way, you happened to sing the most beautiful songs in the world." Dean's eyes were glistening. He tried to speak but couldn't. Elvis continued, "Every time I sing Love Me Tender, I'm using what you taught me. That phrasing, that intimacy, that way of making every person in the audience feel like you're singing just for them. That's all Dean Martin. And I wanted to tell you that in front of all these people because you deserve to know. You're not just my idol, you're my teacher, and I'm the luckiest student who ever lived." The silence in the room was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were witnessing something sacred. Dean reached down and gently took Elvis by the arm. "Son," he said, his voice cracking, "get up, please." Elvis stood. Dean looked at him, this young man who just humbled himself in front of thousands, and Dean did something he rarely did. He pulled Elvis into a tight embrace. The two legends stood there, holding each other, as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause that lasted a full 3 minutes. When they finally separated, Dean was wiping his eyes. Elvis was crying openly, and Dean said something that only Elvis and the people nearby could hear. "Kid, you didn't learn from me. You surpassed me. What you've done with music, with performance, with breaking down barriers, that's all you. I'm honored you watched me, but what I'm watching right now, that's greatness I could never touch." Elvis shook his head. Mr. Martin." "Dean," Dean interrupted. "Call me Dean, and listen to me. You want to know the truth? I came here tonight scared to death." "You? Scared?" "Terrified," Dean admitted, "because I knew that if you were half as good as people said, it meant my time was over, that the torch had been passed, that there was a new king in town." Dean smiled, "And I was right. You're incredible, kid, and I'm proud as hell that you learned anything from me. But everything great about you, that's all Elvis Presley." Elvis couldn't speak. He just nodded, overwhelmed. Then Dean did something unexpected. He looked up at the stage, at the band waiting patiently, and then back at Elvis. "You stopped in the middle of Love Me Tender. That's my favorite Elvis song. You think maybe we could finish it together?" The crowd, hearing this exchange through the microphones Elvis and Dean were still wearing, absolutely lost their minds. The applause was deafening. People were standing on their chairs. Cameras were flashing. Elvis laughed through his tears. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious, but only if you teach me how you do that hip thing. I've been trying to figure that out for years." They walked back to the stage together, Elvis and Dean, the student and the teacher, two legends meeting as equals. Elvis picked up his guitar. Dean stood next to him at the microphone. The band, reading the moment perfectly, began the gentle intro to Love Me Tender again.
Elvis sang the first verse, his voice pure and beautiful. Then for the second verse, Dean joined in. Their voices blended perfectly, Elvis's youthful power and Dean's seasoned smoothness creating something magical. The audience was silent, drinking it in, knowing they were witnessing history. When they finished, the standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. Elvis and Dean stood there, arms around each other's shoulders, soaking it in. Then Dean whispered something in Elvis's ear, patted him on the back, and walked off the stage, back to his seat. Elvis watched him go, then turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice still emotional, "Dean Martin just gave me the greatest gift of my life. He let me thank him. And now I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to dedicate the rest of this show to him. Because everything I do up here, I do standing on the shoulders of giants, and Dean Martin is the biggest giant of them all." Elvis performed for another hour and a half, and for every song, he could see Dean Martin in row 7, seat 12, smiling that famous smile, nodding in approval. The student had made the teacher proud. The king had honored the king of cool, and everyone in that room knew they'd witnessed something that would never be repeated. After the show, backstage, Elvis was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, but he pushed through them all, looking for one person. He found Dean about to leave through the back exit. "Dean, wait!" Dean turned. Elvis rushed up to him. "I just wanted to say thank you for staying, for coming up on stage, for everything." Dean smiled. "Thank you for remembering an old crooner from a different era." "You're not old, and you're not from a different era. You're timeless." Dean put his hand on Elvis's shoulder. "You know what the crazy thing is? I was so nervous to come here tonight. I thought, what if he's disappointed that I showed up? What if I'm a reminder of everything that's outdated?" "Are you kidding?" Elvis said. "You're everything that matters. Style, grace, authenticity. That stuff never goes out of date." "Neither does talent," Dean replied. "And kid, you've got more talent in your little finger than most people have in their entire lives. You're going to be remembered forever. And tonight, you taught me something." "I taught you?" Elvis laughed. "What could I possibly teach you?" "You taught me that greatness isn't about competition. It's about respect. You could have just performed your show and let me sit in the audience, but you stopped everything to honor someone who came before you. That's class. That's real power. And that's why you're not just a great performer. You're a great man." Elvis felt tears welling up again. "Dean, Come here," Dean said, pulling Elvis into another hug. "You make us all proud, kid. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep being generous, keep being humble, and keep being Elvis." They shook hands one last time, and Dean left.
Elvis stood there in the backstage hallway, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. That moment between Elvis and Dean became legendary in Las Vegas. Everyone who was there told the story. It got bigger with each telling. Some versions had them singing 3 songs together. Others had the entire crowd in tears, but the core remained the same. Elvis Presley, at the height of his powers, stopped his show to honor the man who'd inspired him. And Dean Martin, the epitome of cool, showed his vulnerable side and embraced the future. The two men remained friends until Elvis's death in 1977. Dean was devastated by the loss. At Elvis's funeral, Dean sent a wreath with a simple note, "To the greatest student who ever taught the teacher something. Thank you for that night in Vegas. You'll always be the king." Today, when people talk about that 1969 Vegas show, they remember the music, the energy, the comeback. But those who were really there remember something else. They remember the moment when two legends met as equals, when respect flowed both directions, when the young showed humility and the established showed grace. They remember the moment Elvis Presley got on one knee for Dean Martin, and in doing so, elevated them both. If this story of mutual respect between legends moved you, please subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that honoring those who came before you doesn't diminish your greatness, it enhances it. Let us know in the comments who's the person who inspired your journey. We'll see you in the next video with more incredible true stories from music history.